Good morning, everyone. Does it look like we don't look properly caffeinated? Like, did we grab coffee before we started this? Did we? I'm guessing there's coffee still in the back, so if you wanted to access that, uh, it will happen. But I'm really excited to be moderating this session with you guys. These three people are people I would consider to be in the driver's seat of the logistics revolution right now. No pun, well, pun intended. And uh, I'm hoping that we can have a really cool conversation. The trajectory arc of this conversation is going to touch on 3 points. We're going to be looking at funding. We're also going to be looking at um, regulation. But the key thing that I really hope that we can speak to is also how they deploy their solutions and how they're thinking about the future of haulage and freight in a region, in a locale where we still have a massive infrastructure gap. So really, those are the things that we're going to be speaking to today. Obviously, people know who you are, but just speak a little to what you do at your company and how you came to be here. Super brief. Start from you, Uche.
Okay, so Lorry Systems is a logistics coordination platform, and we are connecting cargo owners to transporters. The goal is really to reduce the cost of goods, is to reduce the transportation of cost of goods across Africa. We've seen costs as high as 75% as a proportion of attributed to logistics versus 6% in places like the US. And so this is a big problem that we're trying to solve. We started off in East Africa and have launched in Nigeria this year, and are definitely one of the largest on the continent, sitting on a massive pool of data and information in the haulage space.
So my name is Toyin Oshinowo. I'm the VP of Product for FieldInsight. FieldInsight, what we're looking to do is to connect manufacturers to distributors and their retailers across the supply chain. We feel that right now, especially within Nigeria, the logistics industry is quite fragmented. And while we have had a lot of solutions with regards to certain aspects of the supply chain, we firmly believe that having data as a bedrock can help companies make better business decisions along the supply chain. So what I do by way of product is I go out in the field and ask companies, what are your pain points? What's the value proposition? How can we save you money with regards to operations? And how can you manage your fleet better? So that's basically what we do.
Yeah, good morning all. My name is Obi Ozor. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kobo. When I was in University of Michigan in 2010, I was able to afford a truck with financial aid return. And I bought my first truck and shipped it to Nigeria. The truck was a dump truck. And then the second truck, I bought a trailer. And I noticed that it actually cost a lot of money to move goods from Lagos to Kano than actually moving goods from US to Nigeria or US to of China to Nigeria. But I didn't know why. It also took like 6 days to do a 1,126 kilometer journey. So I started asking myself why. I started moving diapers, shipping baby diapers to Nigeria. And then I was now in the heat of paying that high logistics cost. What I also saw was, why are drivers being unreasonable? Like, why are they charging all this money? But I noticed that because of the poor infrastructure, which is some of the things we'll discuss about today, you're talking of inefficiency. Nobody actually knows if they have return load. So everybody's charging 150% or even 200% because they assume they won't be able to find reverse load. So that is what is causing all this pressure. Of course, we can't solve the infrastructure. We are just a startup, right? That is for government. But in my view, there is at least about 50% of the problem that is caused by inefficiencies that a technology platform might be able to solve. So that's why we went ahead and said, okay, can we be able to use our system and create an ERP system that companies can plug in and show the driver community and truck owner community the loads that are available in the different parts of the country. We now use intelligent algorithm to match the load to the best driver, whether it's for forward logistics or reverse logistics. And today we've been able to do it across more than 80 key organizations in Nigeria, Togo, Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda. And we're also hoping to further deepen our reach within these countries and also potentially go outside of the continent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's jump right into it. I wanted to get a sense, and here's the context that I'm coming from. There seems to be these investment waves in Nigeria primarily, but across the continent we see that trend. 2013 to say 2015 or early 2016, depending on how you look at it, felt like the wave or the era of e-commerce. It's like people throwing a ton of money between Konga and Jumia, close to $1 billion. That's how much we're even aware of. And it's not just them who, picked up a ton of money. In South Africa, for instance, a company like Take a Lot raised a ton of money from Naspers. And that felt like that era where people were just throwing money at, this new form of, commerce that would take us into the next century. The same thing happened with fintech from 2016, and maybe that wave isn't over yet, but it felt like there was a bit of a frenzy around 2016, 2017, and up till 2018 as well. It does feel that it's begun to, taper, but there is still a ton of interest. What it does feel like, and many people are speculating, is that the logistics ecosystem, in all its flavors, but you guys obviously specialize in freight and logistics, is the one that is now beginning to, be on the investors' radar. And we know that Kobo360 just recently picked up $30 million in, mixed funding. We know that Lorry has also picked up funding. Nobody knows exactly how much, but based on some people who reported some stuff, we know that there's close to 10, between $6-10 million there. Maybe you want to debunk that. It does feel like there is, people are speculating that that might be the next place where people are going to be putting a ton of money. Investor interest is going to be focusing on. And I wanted you guys to, from your perspective, give the audience a sense of how easy or how difficult it has been, depending on what your perspective is, to attract capital in the space. Maybe we'll start from Obi.
Yeah, I think why you're seeing that trend is, of course, you had e-commerce, right, trying to see how they can distribute things. And at some point, they were able to prove the concept, but they weren't able to actually scale. And the challenge was supply chain, right? But supply chain is not that easy because it requires a lot of infrastructure and other things, right? So it's not a startup that any person can just jump in, right? So then you started seeing the need, right? And that's what investors that have even invested in e-commerce are beginning to see, that without a supply chain and distribution platforms, these e-commerce can scale. Even things that are not even e-commerce. When I was discussing with Adesina in ADB for the things we want to do with pharma and moving our agro products, you can see that they are eager to do a deal, right? Because the farms and the agro investments they've done are not performing well. Even IFC, like all these things are not performing well because they can't even distribute. If you borrow money to somebody to produce biscuit, right, and they still have to face the same logistics inefficiency, it can't scale, it can't work. So that's why I think, because of the e-commerce, of course, payment have made it easy to even be able to think of launching a digital solution, right? So I think kind of the next wave is this logistics. Maybe after that, it becomes a lot of data-driven things and things like.
So this is basically a pipeline, a funnel, and the parts of it are beginning to fall into place one by one. Is your theory?
Yeah, I think if we keep in that trajectory in the next 5 years to 10 years, the ecosystem will kind of mature so that even e-commerce can just scale, right? Because there's somebody that can do distribution, right? There is data and insight. There's just a lot of things. So I think we kind of need to be building these pieces together. I'll see more. I'll be expecting more collaboration in the next 3 years to 5 years.
Very interesting perspective. Did you want to?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that. Logistics sort of enables the entire economy, and it's a very very local problem, right? So whereas with other sectors, a lot of the money can find its way somewhere else, but in Africa, for instance, if you wanted to invest in this space, you would have to. It's a local problem that because of the infrastructure gaps, um, there that it's sort of easier to pick the winners and just essentially follow the people that understand that local space. So what we're doing is essentially making an enabling environment despite all of the infrastructural challenges that we see. And it's such a big market. I mean, there are different numbers. It's 180 billion in Africa. And because of that, and because of the importance to the economy, I think investors have seen the value of how it would enable agriculture, how it would enable commerce, how it will enable pharmaceuticals, and every other type of supply chain. So it needs to be fixed. And if we cannot wait for the government to fix it, then why not fund the startups that would make it possible? Okay, I don't know if there's some government people here, so let me not.
Yeah,
let me not
no,
talk too
no,
much.
it's totally fine, and there will be government people in here at some point later today. But it is interesting. I mean, to be honest, I don't know that investors are thrilled about funding, the things that the government is supposed to be funding by default. So, but the thing that has come up in both your responses is the fact that infrastructure, again, we're coming back to that infrastructure question, that infrastructure gap, which is where the government is supposed to be playing in squarely. And I don't know that VCs care about, filling the infrastructure gap as much as they really want their money back, which is probably why they're chasing this opportunity. But it does make sense that it is the next logical step in that trajectory of, e-commerce payments. But I really wanted us to segue into that infrastructure question. And Tony might have perspective about the capital question, but really I wanted you to start to speak about how you think about where your tech stack, you deploy it again, because of the fact that the infrastructure is so much of a gap. And let me give you some context. A startup like Zipline that uses drones to deliver blood in Rwanda and most recently in Ghana, for instance, exists because if you try to do that same process over roads, people will die. Literally, there's no way. Like startups like LifeBank exist as well because that gap is a problem, and these people have had to develop some interesting technologies to get around that. Like LifeBank, for instance, it kind of makes sense. It makes a ton of sense actually. You've got bikes that navigate, the landscape. Drones, the unit economics are kind of dicey, but that's the conversation for another day. We don't know how that actually works from a unit economic perspective. However, really that gap is a huge deal, and it's not just the roads that are not there. We're talking about addressing systems. We're talking about all kinds of things. So really, how you guys deploy technology in the near term and long term? How do you factor for that infrastructure gap? How are you thinking about it? And everyone's going to answer this question, but I want Tony to start.
Okay, so for us, what we identified starting off was anything that we did had to be mobile first. And you also have to take into account limited to no connectivity whatsoever. The assumption that we had to make was, say, for instance, if you had a truck moving from Lagos to Abuja, if it gets to Abuja, there could be a possibility where it could connect to the internet. If it gets back to Lagos, there is also that assumption. So we build our tech with the logic that, yes, we can get proof of delivery, we can track the truck, but if at all there is a break in connectivity, we can track how long, say, for instance, a device has been out of sync with the server. And we also make sure that immediately it connects to the internet, it syncs all the data that it has stored on the device. For us, I think the major issue is we need to collect data. It's all well and good telling government or whoever to create infrastructure, but if you don't know where things are, then you can't point anybody in the right direction. So our logic is if we can map all the retailers or all the distributors, if we can then say, okay, we're going to rate a distributor out of 10, so we know that, okay, Say, for instance, if a large manufacturer wants to move their goods from A to B, and we say, okay, this distributor would be the better option because they can move to however many of your clients, it then becomes a more intelligent decision. And then you will have a baseline for the government or whoever to then build that infrastructure to satisfy that.
Did you guys want to?
So, I mean, to the point, makes a valid point about the sort of lack of data infrastructure beyond, the road networks and all of that. And the way that we've had to, beyond our technology and the connection that we allow with the cargo owners and the transporters, on our side, we're trying to rate the transporters and the drivers so that we match the best and the best cargo owners to the best transporters. And the goal is to get to a point where we can then also automate pricing for whatever distance or whatever type of good it is that you need to transport. But beyond that, I think that it would be naive for us to say that tech solves this entire thing, this entire logistics problem. And so what we've also had to do is create teams and offline teams to support our tech in the journey to complete automation. I mean, even in the US, Convoy, I don't know if you know them, they will okay, so they're one of the biggest ones in this similar sort of space in the US, and they will say that, we have 100% automation. And then you look at an asterisk at the bottom and it will say for our major routes. So so it's still something that has nowhere been fully automated, let alone in an environment like this. So we've had to sort of work around that and create sort of parallel physical teams as well, with the hope of transitioning to full automation.
I think personally the idea of full automation, it's a pipe dream, to be honest, because like you said, even in the abroad, you still have it's where it's semi automated. It's never fully. So for us, what we've done is we've created agency networks who can help actually map locations, retail locations. We also have a managed marketplace where we have manufacturers come to us and create orders where we actually facilitate the movement of goods from A to B. So I think initially when we started, we thought that it was purely a technology problem. And it's taken roughly about 3 years for us to get that point that we can't solve this problem just with technology. It has to be bound in with operations as well.
Obi seems to be itching to.
Yeah. What we're building is a pure technology play because there is nothing we can really do on the infrastructure part at this time until you are big enough to be able to affect policies. I still believe that a tech company can be able to support infrastructure. You just need to be big so that the government can listen to you. And one of the things we're doing in our relationship with government is in our V2 of our app in April, there is a technology we put there that is able to measure the vibrations on the road. So if a driver is using the app, we're able to kind of measure the vibration on the road. It's not a data we're ready to share with the government today, but we're beginning to really map out the infrastructure gap. Because the conversation with government can't just be, I need infrastructure. But are you able to provide this? You move everywhere, right? Literally, in 5 countries. Are you able to show the digital footprint of these roads and show, okay, this road is bad because I'm seeing a lot of spike in the vibrations, right? So that's not really for us, but it's also, that technology is also guiding the algorithm that matches drivers. So that's able to say, okay, this road has become bad, right? So drivers should be rerouted to another road, right? It's still nasty, but hopefully in the next 9 months, it should be robust enough to really be able to give proper routing to drivers, more than just like a Google app that says you should follow here, right? So that's one. The other thing is really data. So in the beginning, we wanted to create an algorithm that will predict prices. It was nearly impossible, right? But today, because we've gathered a ton of data, you're able to kind of craft an algorithm that is smart and fits the continent. Like a part of our algorithm is what we call expected profit, right? So, but if you're thinking of an algorithm in a mobility space, the first thing that comes to your mind is distance and all these things, right? Yeah, it's important. But for an algorithm that will predict logistics price, you have to think of maintenance. What is the expected maintenance, right? What is the expected profit? What are the dispatch? And other key things that go inside this pricing. So what we hope to achieve in the next 24 months is to build what we call a global logistics operating system, GLOS. It becomes the digital infrastructure to power supply chain across Africa. Whether you're thinking of the AFTA that is coming in, can somebody be able to have a robust digital infrastructure that can now do transits across countries, right? Because the policymakers can come up with policy, right? If there is no digital infrastructure to power that, I don't really know how you can do that because it will still become corrupt again. It will still be that when you come to Seme, you stay there for 13 days trying to clear a goods that is bound for Ghana, right? So it's still digital that will power those things, right? So that's how we're thinking of this thing. How can we be able to gather a lot of data, right? Make it like put the African touch in that instead of just hijacking something that works in different parts of the world, right? Make it an African solution that is able to take care of some of these needs.
I mean, it does feel like a bit of a chicken and egg problem because, we were discussing in the back room about how you were talking specifically about what he was saying, which is gathering enough data that you can create, policy intelligence because for the government. And then whether they would accept it or not or run with it is now another question. But, you need to gather enough information to do that. However, the chicken and egg question is, how long can you stay in business for considering the challenges, enough to be big enough to actually collect that information and then be able to make any sort of actionable, generate any actionable insights from that, And I'll give you another example. A company like HubStop, for instance, that apparently sold to Apple, would never have existed if that public transit infrastructure was not there. Something that allows people make more intelligent decisions about where they're going, how they commute, and because the maps layer was there, but the bus transit information is also there. And then you put those layers together, you're able to create a user experience that people, and then Apple found it valuable enough that will never have happened. So it's chicken and egg. It's like, which one comes first? Do we raise $30 million and then go after and build a GLOS before we can actually do something? Or is it possible for people to innovate? Because some people have just $5,000 from CC Hub and they want to be in this space as well. I don't know.
It's one of those things where I would, with regards to how long, I think my answer would be as long as I have money in my corporate account. Because the reality is, I don't think the market is mature enough to totally appreciate the need for data. Right now, we're consumed with moving goods from A to B. Like I said, when we first of all started, we started out purely as a technology solution. And what we found was we had companies who we'd have meetings with them and they'd be like, yes, this is a great idea. And then when it came down to paying, it then became another conversation. So you get the feeling that the value appreciation is not yet there. But then there's something to be said for being a front runner who started getting that data in. Like, for instance, we have over 2 million data points, which we've collected over the last 2 to 3 years. And I would hope that at some point I'm going to be able to sell that data for millions and millions and millions of naira. But it is about waiting for the market to mature or grab the market by the hands and pull it into a point where, yes, you can appreciate that data is there. That data can help you make policy decisions and that data can save you money.
I wanted to add to this. So I love the thing you mentioned about grabbing the market by the hand, right? So
it's being polite.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were facing Waybill collecting proof of delivery was one of the biggest problem we had to solve in the past 90 days in Kobo, right? And then we got pissed off and we said, okay, this is done. So our team built on GLOS, we built a digital waybill system that was audited by PwC. Because the first time when we wanted to build it, we asked our few customers. They said, we don't want to have complication in January with auditors if they don't approve this digital waybill. So we had to build and go get approval from auditors. They basically reviewed it. Today, I thought that immediately we finished building it, all the customers will adopt it. It's only 4% of the base today that have adopted that digital waybill. However, I'm still very optimistic because what I see in Nigeria is we compare a lot. So there's already a trick I'm going to do. So which is once the big ones accept it, you go to them, we follow, right? And they will just start doing that. But that, in any market, immediately you build something like this that removes all this paperwork, cashless, paperless thing, everybody jumps on it. It saves you when you're doing audit, right? Because you don't need to have January way bills on one shelf, February, right? It's all digital, right? But it's not, the adoption is not coming as fast. But remember, we are Africans and Nigerians. Everything must be forceful.
Okay.
Can I just say something? We have proof of delivery, so if you want to have a conversation, we might go
Wow.
after.
Okay. We're just going to put a pin in that because there is two segues I want to make off the back of that. Everyone's sitting apparently on top of data, millions of data points that they hope to sell for, millions of dollars at some point. And the fact that there seems to be an ongoing conversation with regulators. And I wanted to segue into that real quick. But before that, I'm looking into the Slido and it doesn't seem, maybe it's my internet, but no one's asked questions, which is that probably means that you're so intent on this conversation, you're like, I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to miss a minute. All of this is being recorded, by the way, so, videos of all of this stuff you're going to get after the fact. I have questions for days, and to be honest, I don't think there's enough time for us to have this conversation. So if you don't ask questions, it's totally cool, but it will be good to see some interaction from the audience. I definitely don't want us to miss any pertinent interactions or angles that we might be missing. So I will be refreshing. Okay, there we go. One question is in there. Please ask your questions, and at some point we will get to them 10 minutes before we have to round this off. So we have another 10 minutes to have a conversation. Okay, guys. This way. Look at me. Guys. Yeah, this way. All right. Regulators. A couple things happened that were very interesting. I'm not going to be specific, but we know that there's people who are intent on taxing the technology industry as a group. We know that there are, in the logistics space, for instance, we've seen tariffs, we've seen, unions working with government, that is offline unions working with government, to create what I would consider barriers or taxes, for companies who are using technology primarily to deploy their solutions to have to pay before they can actually do business, and I guess many of the people who are feeling that now are actually in the transport side of things, like the human transport. Is there a term for that? Like in logistics parlance, like the Ubers, for instance, the people that move people. Is there a jargon that you guys use? Because there's freight for goods. Like no one mistakes freight for human beings. But what do you call Uber or people transport? So in that particular space, there's a ton of very direct, explicit regulatory interest. In your space, to what extent are you seeing that sort of pushback, and how do you guys interact with regulators? What is your general approach to regulation? And because we're going to be having that conversation later today as well, it'll be good to get a sense of how the operators are experiencing and thinking about it. Let's start from you, Uche.
So I think from a regulatory perspective, I'd probably say that the number one problem is the ports. It's causing so much congestion in the States. And so the data that we're collecting, we're hoping will be useful to the regulators. So for instance, there are talks about connecting, the SGR from Ibadan to the ports. But then 60% of the containers go the other way, right? So that's data that they could easily have used to make those decisions. And those are the kinds of conversations we want to start having to help them automate the process, have proper use of call-up systems, have proper use of.
It does feel like the sort of thing that we will put in a white paper and make public. We should have that. That sounds incredible. Actually,
Yeah.
is
Yeah. So I mean, for us, the goal is I mean, we can't create everything, but the goal will be to have systems in all of these public goods and in all of these public services, so that we can integrate into them and make the entire move of goods more efficient. So imagine if the port was fully automated, and imagine if we could feed in our data into that, or they could feed in their data into ours. And so those are the kinds of conversations that we're having. From a tax perspective, we haven't quite we haven't quite gotten there. We hope that we do not. But
it's going to happen. It's inevitable.
yes, you've now brought it to the fore. Thank you. But yeah, that's those are the kinds of conversations that we're having. So we want them to be able to use our data to make informed decisions on infrastructure.
Obi, you guys seem to be really far along in these sorts of conversations.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, when you start getting big, it start attracting attention, but you can't keep being small, right? So we're beginning to face a lot of tax, right? In fact, in May, I was with Abakari on this tax issue, right? So we suppose as a pure tech platform, we can have VAT, withholding tax, and all this. We are not a transport company. We're a technology company. Money moves through our platform. But the tax authorities don't want to see it that way, right? And then at this point, we are not big enough, right, to say, okay, you're going to get more transport. 84% of transport in Nigeria are not earners, right? You can say, okay, I'm going to get a large Danjuma, right, that never paid tax for ages. I'm going to deduct this money from you. No, you are going to be the one losing that money. You can't debit him. He's never paid tax forever, right? So when regulators are telling Kobo, oh, you've done all these billions of naira in transaction, you need to have this, have that. Oh, we didn't deduct it, because you can't actually deduct it, right? So what do you do? So that's conversation we're having with regulators, right? Sure, if these type of companies will succeed, you're going to need to give us wiggle room, maybe give us like a 5-year to figure it out, right? But we've also, of course, hired the big dogs in the house, the law firms in Nigeria, KPMG and others, to really start really making that argument. Because if not, it cuts into your profit and it becomes very difficult to scale. That's on that one. In terms of ports, we built a call-up system, right, that we showed to Hadiza in MPA and their team. It wasn't adopted. It wasn't adopted, right? The solution they put in the port today is very manual. In fact, it just restricts flow of containers and goods. There is nothing done about empties, right? If you go to Apapa today, majority of the trucks you see are carrying container. We don't have export in Nigeria. It's like 16%. So there's no goods inside those things. It's empty containers, right? That's what is going in. You will barely see any truck that doesn't have a container, right? So what did the authorities tell us? They said that they are landlords. They can only advise port operators on what they should do, but they can't force them to go and get terminals like in Ikeja, in Shagamu, so that people can drop off container there. And the port operators don't want to do that, because if they do that, I might charge them 250,000 to come and move that empty container back inside the port when the ship is actually there to collect the containers. So what you see is that they say that, oh, we're offloading the empties inside that place, but when you enter inside the terminals, there's no activities going on. The ship is not there, right? So I think, but it's interesting conversation. So there is a tech part to it, but the bigger problem is not even tech. The bigger problem is just force port operators to have holding bays outside of the port. That is the first one, right? And once you're able to do that, the second one is how do you use the call-up system that we already built for free, right? And just organize trucks. They dial *735*1 and put their TDO number, and they queue up on the system, right? And they keep coming in gradually, right? So it's an interesting thing, but
I mean, you guys obviously have very strong ideas about how they can make these systems more efficient, and I mean, I guess if I was a regulator, I would be like, maybe you guys can come and hang out with us for a week and consult for us about how we can help you to help us to help you. Does that even come up?
So the one thing, we're mostly a tech company, right? So for me, when it comes to regulators, I'm thinking about data protection. And within Nigeria,
That's another angle.
I don't even know whether there is one. I know there's been one that has been filed, but I don't think it's gone through yet. Now, currently, you will have companies, your commercial companies, with their confidentiality clauses and their data protection, which, yes, we can use the data, we can anonymize it, and we can push it forward. But if later on down the line, the government suddenly wakes up and then decides, I want to put in data protection without a true understanding as to how we do need that data, we do need for it to be shared, that could cause problems further down the line. And with regards to taxes, one thing I do find fascinating is the fact that in this country, you'd have a startup and within a year, you're expected to pay VAT and withholding. And it's a very hostile environment for any startup. So I think we do need to get ourselves in a position where we're talking to individuals within government, because Nigeria is a hostile environment, and having rules or having no policies whatsoever to support companies that are starting up, I think it's a problem.
I actually wonder if we'd been doing this town hall in Kigali, for instance, whether it will be the same perspective. And I'm just putting this out there, especially for people who will be watching this after the fact, about, one of the things that I'm wondering is, depending on where we were in Africa, whether this conversation might change slightly. If we were in Addis Ababa, for instance, if we were in Accra, if we were in, I don't want to say Johannesburg and Cape Town, but, if we were in those places, will things be different? Rwanda, for instance, likes to describe itself as the test kitchen of Africa, so I don't have a ton of context, but I suspect that maybe things might be a bit different in the way they engage. They do things like fintech sandboxes. There does seem to be a more robust conversation with regulators about how the future, near term and long term, is shaped. So maybe there might be something for regulators to learn from other places in the world, and even we're talking about here in Africa. Not even actually going to Silicon Valley to learn these things.
So I was on a panel with the Minister of ICT in Rwanda, and she mentioned Rwanda being this test hub, right, in Africa. I disagreed. Rwanda cannot be the Silicon Valley of Africa. Rwanda is a small country.
That is not what was said. I'm just funny.
No, even for policies, right? Yeah, it's a small, tiny country, right, that doesn't have the general environment and the complexities in multiple African countries, right? We have to force our government, right, to start innovating, because Nigeria is the best place if you do something in Nigeria. When we entered Kenya, right, it was a walk in the park, honestly. Like literally, tech app adoption is 96%. I have not touched my foot in Kenya in the past 5 months. Seriously. But there is no week I don't enter Papa 2 times. Right? So, and what that is telling you is that if you can innovate for Nigeria, soon we will go to US and launch, and then we will destroy Convoy. Because it's so easy building that solution in Nigeria. So I don't think that if any company succeed in Rwanda, then you can say, okay, a proven concept. Let me go to any other country. You will start again. You just start again.
I mean, it's a fascinating perspective, The idea of a test kitchen might be, do this thing in circumstances that don't kill you so that you can actually birth the thing. And you're like, it has to be tried by fire, because if it survives here, then it'll survive. I think it's different schools of thought. that are both valid. It actually, it's something I can actually get behind. I just think that we shouldn't throw out the baby with it. I think they're two valid approaches.
We're expecting people like you to champion Nigeria as the test. That's what you need to do, not Rwanda.
Okay, before I ask my last question, I'm super aware of time. We're actually going to have only 10 minutes to do the audience Q&A, which means that we'll probably be able to get to only 2 or 3 questions at the most. And why I'm pointing that out is that you need to upvote the questions you do want to get answered. So take another 30 seconds to just go through the questions. Obviously, if you ask the question, you're biased, but just find in your heart to upvote the questions that you feel people will benefit the most from, so that we can actually take those questions. I'm bound, because this is some sort of democracy, to take the most upvoted questions. Please do not upvote prank questions, because that doesn't help anybody. We've seen that happen. I mean, we'll find out who it was. There's not a ton of people. Anyways, really, that's what's going to happen in the next 3 minutes. The last question I'm going to ask you guys is about collaboration for 2 purposes: for mutual prosperity and taking over the world and making a ton of money, from selling millions of data points, even though you have to think about data protection, which is I just need to point that out. But also for the purposes of, engaging regulators at the high level. You've spoken about the fact that despite how much money you have raised, you're still not in the place you would like to be able to have those conversations from a place of leverage, from a place of strength. And that does suggest to me that some sort of collaboration, some sort of, joint front needs to be happening. So your thoughts and perspectives on that. But I'm also interested, again, in what collaboration looks like for the just cynical business purposes. What might that even look like in the future? You guys are sitting on different data points, and it's fragmented, right? And would you like to see more consolidation, or is everyone happy the way things currently are?
I think I would say collaboration from a different part of the value chain perspective. So it goes back to the point I made about being able to see data all the way through from when the crop is being manufactured, having precision agriculture keen into that, to when it gets to the warehouse and when it needs to be transported, or when goods are ordered all the way from China or Europe or the US, and when it gets into the port, and getting to the manufacturer, and getting from the manufacturer to the distributor, and then plugging into what they have from the distributor to their retailers, and then from the retailers all the way to the users. So for me, I think that is the collaboration that I really would like to see, whereby we can plug into all of these data points, and it would enable us to create more value for our customers.
I mean, for me, collaboration is something that we are looking to. The more individuals we have using our solution, the more data we get. Obviously, whatever collaboration happens, it needs to be a mutually agreeable one. That could either be financial or it could be value. We have APIs that we can share. So I wouldn't say no. I mean, the long term, to be honest with you, the only way we're going to make this work is with collaboration. Gone are the days where everyone is selfishly trying to hide whatever it is they're doing, and then someone launches, the next person launches the next thing, and the next person launches the next thing. It doesn't really pay to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, for me, collaboration is key, and we are willing.
I love the collaboration idea, but what I'm also looking at is culturally in our continent, do we actually collaborate? Right? Is also looking at whether we just talk like politicians and say all the right things, and then we leave, and it's the same. When I'm looking at collaboration, is there really any industry in this continent that have collaborated, even in the traditional sense, right? And that's the biggest challenge we actually have, that we don't have history of collaboration. I was discussing that with somebody, and I was saying, even Africa, we have 54 countries. And we're just now trying to bring it together. Everything we do is always fragmented. That's the first thing that goes into our mind, right? People started like gas station business, imagine, early 2000s. gas station business was still a business. Today is no longer a business. Gas stations don't actually make money because, like, literally, there's no collaboration. Nobody will say, okay, I'm going to plug in, and instead of building my station, let me buy tankers and distribute your diesel, right? Or let me partner in other remote areas. They're just going to go into the same place. So, of course, tech cannot be talking like politics, right? We can't say all the right things, right? And then go. What I'm thinking in terms of this collaboration is that there is actually not a lot of tech companies that have that level of scale that actually can add a lot of value, even with collaboration, right? Of course, apart from Uber, right, I have a lot of data on the transport within the markets they are. So it's not really that Uber even have the data in all the sectors of transport across Nigeria, right? So what I'm thinking is, can actually a tech company start also reaching out to the traditional market, right? Like these luxurious bus transporters now. There's no data any person need in transportation in Nigeria that luxurious bus transporters don't have, right? But it's in papers. They write it down on paper, right? Can a company actually just go digitize that thing, and then somebody can actually pull a lot of data, right? So what I'm not seeing right now is, like, even if you're going to collaborate with somebody, is there really, as you mentioned, what is the value add? Like, are you giving me something I already have, right? Is the partnership really worth it, right? I was looking into fintech. There is something we do. We do working capital financing type of thing for drivers, right? And you say, okay, I need a fintech to come and deploy an average 385,000 to drivers per trip, right? But a lot of them per month. And I couldn't find a partner.
I mean, these are the questions. I'm really, really sorry that I'm cutting this short because we don't have a ton of time. But again, one of the points of these town halls is to foster that sort of environment. And, we're going to have multiple breaks today where people can have, look, if you're one of the people that he was describing, for instance, please, accost him at the back and pitch your solutions. But fundamentally, across the value chain, I'm pretty sure that there is ways for us to partner in ways that enhance the, combined value of all the solutions that people are working on. So with that, I think we'll just jump into the Q&A segment. There is the most voted question is currently from Business Insider SSA, who I want to also say thank you to for being here today. Our Minister of Finance recently said that Nigeria will need $100 billion, that's 36 trillion naira, over the next 30 years to improve our infrastructure. And this is what he says. Does that depress you? Well, I don't know if it's a he or she.
No, it doesn't. We have the money now. Nigeria has the money.
Wait.
Right? Nigeria has
$100 billion.
Huh?
$100 billion.
Yeah, Nigeria has the money. Right? So I think it can be done. The only challenge we have in this continent, we have money, right? And that's why at times I'm still optimistic about this continent, right? Because Nigeria only have one problem, leadership problem. Other countries in Africa might have two. You have leadership and you don't have cash, right? At least if you have cash, one day when we have somebody in this industry, in politics, we might just be able to solve that infrastructure problem. Look at what is happening on our Papa Road today, right? If you have gone there, you see the type of road infrastructure that Dangote is putting there. This is not like concrete roads that will last for 50 years. Like, I was surprised that this type of thing can actually be done in Nigeria, right? But it's possible. It's possible. So I don't get depressed about some of these few problems in Nigeria because if you have leadership, it will be solved. That's also what creates the opportunity in the country, right? If it's all solved, there is nothing for us to be solving. But of course, we are part of the solution as well.
It does take incredible optimism to be an entrepreneur in Nigeria in the first place. So I feel like everyone sitting here is optimistic by default, But did you have perspectives? Real quick.
One doesn't have a choice. One has to be optimistic or else we die. So, yeah.
I think that, yes, $100 billion to fix all of our problems, but I think they're easy wins. I mean, if you look at Tema here, for instance, in Ghana, something they did, they got the private sector to fix the roads, and they didn't toll outrightly, but they just added the charges to every move. So every take say 1,000 naira extra for every move, and that way you're paying for that road. So there are some quick wins. There's some low hanging fruits that can be implemented.
And maybe
That
innovative
will
ways
make
to
our
actually
lives
raise
easier.
$100 billion.
We just need a listening ear. We just need people to listen to us, right? We've spoken about some of these ideas here. There are a few of them that, if implemented, will make our lives easier. But it is true that if everything was fixed, then what's the point of why are we here?
Absolutely.
Right?
Next question. You are working in an analog space with people set in their ways. What are your methods for getting them to work with you on tech-enabled platforms? I'm guessing they're speaking across not just the consumers, but also providers, distributors across here.
So adoption is always a major problem with technology. You can solve it incentivizing your users is usually the best way. If you're deploying your solution to a company, you need to get a champion within that company to make their users use the application. If you don't have that, what tends to happen is nobody uses your application, and then your client comes to you and tells you your app isn't working. So it's a people issue. You need to incentivize. You need to make sure that the application that you build is extremely user friendly. There's no point putting a lot of grammar within an app for a driver who, quite frankly, doesn't have the patience because he's driving and needs to get to a certain venue within a short period of time. It takes a lot of energy. You need to have customer success tied in as well. You can't just deploy technology and think that people are just going to use it. So you need to have people who are going to continually teach and, make people use it.
I'm curious about what Obi does every time he's going to a papa. Like,
So Nigerians only adopt things that will either help them make more money or reduce money. And that's general, right? So one of the things, before I stopped using Uber when it became too expensive, but I started using it again. It's so cheap, more than taxi now, that you just have to use it. Even if Uber app becomes complicated, every person will still use it because it saves you money, right? So when it comes to drivers, getting reverse load, drivers don't use the driver app because of forward load. They don't use it because I'm going to get a trip from Lagos to Kano. They only use that thing because I'm going to get the wheat that I will carry from Funtua to Ibadan. That is the only reason why they use it, right? And then is you really understanding why are these people using this thing? And then you start communicating in the right way. Like, not really, they don't care about all this jargon we talk about. They just want to see, okay, you go use them, find load from north to Ibadan. That's key thing. For customers, what are they trying to do? Of course, the key thing is transparency, right? Then you say, okay, all these, in certain companies, you have logistics managers and other people kind of doing certain things, but can senior management now be able to have control of the business, right? So when you're talking to the right senior people, the top people, that this allows them to have control now on what goes on in the supply chain. That's one key thing why they adopt the ERP system, right? Of course, if it saves them cost by bringing more supply, which puts pressure on pricing, then of course it makes sense. But the key thing for senior management, how can I be in control of all these my factories in different parts of Nigeria? Why I know that prices cannot be inflated, I know what is going on, I know that offloading is delayed due to other things. Yeah, that's why they use it.
Cool. It looks like you guys love us, so we've been allowed to take one more question. This is the last question that we're going to take, and I'm actually struggling to articulate this. What is the plan for making the logistics ecosystem more flexible and fit with growing industries like e-commerce to increase their end user reach? It's super convoluted question. And considering it's the last one.
So I think one of the key thing I was just discussing with our product team is how can we build a distribution system for e-commerce and even the traditional commerce, the trade part of things, because e-commerce is still not the thing that is moving Nigeria, right? It's still the guys going to Alaba that are buying things, sending it to Onisha, sending it to Wuse Market. That is how Nigeria is powered, right? And I was asking somebody that it would be interesting in our team to start thinking about that thing. But the challenge in those spaces is that because there is no scale, you can't actually hold somebody and say, okay, I'm going to do an investment of $2 million into this space, right? Who are you doing it for, right? Where is the volume? So you now have to start building out the chain again because the e-commerce have not tapped into this trade, which is how everything moves in Nigeria, right? If you come to Jibo or Alaba, you see trailers being, or Lagos Island. Trailers are moving things in pallets to different parts of Nigeria. They are not ordering it online, right? So it becomes difficult. Who am I building these fulfillment centers for? Right? So there is the work also, like basically this type of thing we're having where we're talking, right? Can the e-commerce also look down and look into this traditional market and start bringing them online so that we can now be able to have the data to say, okay, I can do this investment because there is an offtake.
I mean, it does feel like there is a significant value chain interaction conversation that needs to happen where, and the ones that I identified, I'm, again, not very smart about these things, but it does seem like e-commerce is the base. And then on top of that, the payments people, and then you guys are the next level still on top of that. And then we will start seeing analytics and data intelligence, which if you guys don't build out, other people will come whose core competence is that. And all of those things need to, if not vertically integrate in the one monolith, but talk to each other in a way that is collaborative, and then we can see some traction.
I would argue that e-commerce is actually a small part of the problem, really. Primarily because of the demographic who actually use e-commerce. The reality is that most of the goods that are being moved, they're offline. So I would argue that if you were able to solve the distribution problem, period, it will have a knock-on effect on e-commerce. So with us at FieldInsight, our argument is if we could actually manage the distribution between distributors, retailers, and also manufacturers, and we become somewhat of a virtual distributor, we could plug into e-commerce. We could also manage offline distribution within a certain area. Let's start small. Say around Lagos, then we can expand outwards. But that's the way we see things.
All right, everyone. That's it. I'd like you to give us a round of applause for an amazing panel. Thank you so much, guys. Uche, Toyin, Obi, for being here.